The night air in Lisbon is heavy, as if weighed down by centuries of secrets that the Atlantic refuses to wash away. A strange wet feeling clung to my skin, making every hair on my arm stand up. I remember the way my heart pounded in my chest, an unconscious drumbeat kept echoing in my ears, even though at the time I couldn't explain why. From that moment on, something felt wrong. An uneasy pressure whispered into my mind that I should never have turned into that alley that fateful night. I came to Portugal, not to relax or explore the ancient beauty of this city. My purpose was more practical and somewhat peculiar, to search for secret archives for research on esoteric maritime history. I'm haunted by the explorers who disappeared without a trace centuries ago, leaving behind only cryptic diaries and strange relics that raise more questions than answers. Formal libraries, public archives, have produced almost no significant results. My last hope rested on rumors of hidden archives, private collections hidden away in the city's old districts. And so, I wandered, letting my feet lead the way through the dark, narrow stone streets. The shadows of the buildings seemed to stretch unnaturally. They crept and flickered strangely under the weak light of a few sparse street lights. It was in one such alley, a shabby and almost forgotten alley, that I came across a modest sign, almost blending into the old stone wall. Faint writing on it read, Antiquitatis. A dusty window revealed a cluttered interior, high shelves filled with objects that glittered faintly in the light of a single ceiling lamp. I hesitated at the threshold. The heavy wooden door made a low creak when I pushed gently, almost like a groan of pain. My palms were cold and sweaty. When the door opened a crack, a mixed scent immediately assaulted my sense of smell, the smell of old leather, the smell of moldy parchment, and a bit of something metallic, fishy, maybe the smell of rusty iron or old brass oxidized over the years. But most of all, there was an intense feeling, an unmistakable feeling that I was being watched. It came like a chilling wind, even though there was no wind in the alley. My breathing became shallow, and I noticed my hands were shaking slightly. The store was eerily quiet. The single light flickered weakly and erratically, creating strange dancing shadows on the walls filled with objects. And then, I saw him. A tall figure stood near the back of the store, among the shelves of books and antiques. He wore a long coat, the material of which was so dark that it seemed to absorb even the little light that existed in that cramped space. I could barely see his face, it was in darkness, but I felt his eyes on me. The veins in my throat pounded as he spoke, silently calling my name. My exact name, as if we were old acquaintances who had arranged to meet a long time ago. A cold shock shook all my senses. How did he know my name? We've never met, I'm sure. Or at least, I believed so. He did not give any explanation, just gently gestured towards a series of objects displayed on an old, crooked wooden table in the middle of the room. In a strangely soft, deep, and even voice, he pointed out that these artifacts might be of particular interest to me during my research. There was a measured politeness to his voice, but it was like a thin veneer, covering something older, deeper, and perhaps more dangerous. Tight, despite the alarm bells ringing loudly in my head. I tried to speak up, tried to ask how he knew me, about my research. But he only gave the vaguest answers. In fact, it is hardly an answer at all, but more of a gentle statement that knowledge itself will find those who are eager to seek it. A chill ran down my spine, my chest tightening as if the walls were slowly closing in, squeezing me. My tongue felt thick and dry. I could only nod mechanically, stepping closer to examine the items he said had inexplicable significance to my work. On that rotting wooden table was a strange collection, a brass astrolabe, tarnished by time. Covered with complex astronomical symbols, an ancient compass with strange, almost frightening carvings on its lid, a pile of crisp parchment, covered with incomprehensible scribbles in faded ink, and finally, an ivory figurine, depicting a cloaked figure with a completely expressionless, clean-shaven face. My heart seemed to stop beating for a beat and then beat harder and faster when I recognized the style of writing on the parchments. It matched perfectly the handwriting of one of the explorers I was researching. A man who had mysteriously disappeared centuries before. How is that possible? How could this strange warehouse of antiques, hidden in an anonymous alley in Lisbon, possess exactly the objects so closely related to my particular research topic, seemingly lying here waiting for me to pick them up? Surprise mixed with a feeling of insecurity grew inside me. Yet, I bought them. That's the most horrifying part when I remember it. Not the price, not their strangeness, but the way I did it. A strong, almost irresistible urge made me take out the money to pay without any objection or hesitation. The transaction took place in almost absolute silence, except for the rustle of old banknotes, and the only sound as he carefully wrapped each artifact in rough brown paper. My breathing became short and rapid. I couldn't decide whether it was because of the excitement of a researcher finding treasure, or because of the anxiety coiling from deep in my gut. When he handed the package to me, he said very softly, almost in a whisper, that I should be careful when using these treasures. His eyes, even hidden in the darkness, seemed to shine with a strange light. I felt my muscles tense. My gut screamed at me that I had just made a terrible mistake, one that could not be undone. But I still hugged the package and walked out of the store, feeling a strange relief mixed with unease and an inexplicable mystery enveloping my mind. The alley outside remained dark and the room only had enough space for a rickety bed, an old wardrobe, and a desk placed next to the only window overlooking the paved street below. My chest rose and fell erratically as I carefully opened the package. The first is the astrolabe. Its metal was cold to the touch, and the surface was covered with bizarre symbols that I had never seen in any astronomical literature. I ran my fingers across its surface, feeling the delicate but unfamiliar engravings, and found my breathing quickening every time I encountered a line of writing I couldn't decipher. Then I placed the other items in front of me, the compass with the disturbing engravings, the brittle pile of parchment, and the expressionless ivory statue. The weak light from the single table lamp turned their shadows into strange, dancing shapes on the wall behind them. My hands were shaking more than I wanted to admit. There is a sense of oppression radiating from these objects. An ancient heaviness. I fell asleep sometime after midnight, exhausted from the trip and the emotional turmoil of the day. But sleep does not bring peace. I was awakened by faint whispers, very soft, almost inaudible. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the wind passing through the cracks in the old window frame. But no. Those whispers had an unnatural rhythm, like there were many people talking at a great distance, just out of earshot. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear my pulse pounding in my temples. I sat up in bed, my body drenched in cold sweat, the bedsheet wrapped tightly around my legs as if trying to hold me down. Looking toward the table, the artifacts seemed to have shifted slightly from when I'd set them down, though in the dim light I couldn't be completely sure. My throat was dry, and when I tried to swallow, it felt like I was swallowing hot sand. The next day, carrying the obsession from the night before, I returned to the library, hoping to find any documents confirming the origin of my newly acquired antiques. But something is very wrong. My memory, which is usually a researcher's sharpest tool, suddenly became alarmingly hazy. I forgot about the mundane tasks I intended to do. I misplaced the notes I had so carefully organized just a few hours ago. I mixed up references that I was once sure of. A fog seemed to be covering my mind, making it strangely difficult to concentrate. That night, the whispers became louder and clearer. This time, there was no doubt that they came from the artifacts placed on the table. They are no longer distant, elusive sounds. They tell fragmentary stories of centuries past, of voyages that never returned, of talented individuals who disappeared without leaving a trace other than rumors and the items they left behind. I heard names mentioned, names I recognized immediately from my research. Each name is an explorer, a scholar, a seafarer who has disappeared, leaving behind nothing but half-true stories and mysteries. My skin prickles as I realize the horrifying truth. These objects are not just about them, they belong. Those people have disappeared. It's as if they were collected by someone as souvenirs or macabre trophies from lives erased. The next morning, I felt more exhausted than ever, as if my little sleep had been completely stolen from me rather than a place to recover. What's worse is that I can barely recall the details of my own research anymore. Important dates, places, and references that were once engraved in my mind are. Panic began to rise in my chest, a cold, violent wave. I tried to steady my breathing, but it only came out in dry, frantic gulps. Lost, disjointed images began to flash in my mind without warning. I see antiques in a different setting, perhaps on the deck of a ship rocking in the middle of the ocean, or in a dimly lit study. But just as these latent memories began to form clearly, they dissipated like a mist blown by the wind, leaving me with a feeling of emptiness and confusion. During another restless night, as the whispers persisted in my ears, I thought I felt movement in the corner of the room, where the table held antiques. The tiny ivory statue seemed to tremble slightly under the faint light, or perhaps it was just my tired eyes. A tingling sensation spreading throughout my body as I cautiously approached to examine it. When my finger touched the surface of the ivory, I felt a slight shock, like static electricity, but stronger. And more strangely, the ivory surface of that cloaked figure was much warmer than before, almost as if it had a faint pulse, a hidden life within. I almost dropped it, my breathing quickening, my heart beating so violently that spots of light danced in my vision. And then, I heard it. An unmistakable, hoarse voice rang out from somewhere in the room. Or perhaps right in my mind. It no longer whispers, but speaks clearly, even though the volume is very low. It's about the collector. Collector of knowledge. Hoarder of secrets and lost memories. I fell onto the bed, shaking uncontrollably, my clothes drenched in cold sweat. The collector. That name echoed in my head. I tried to remember the face of the antique seller, the man in the Antiquitatis store. An image, it felt like it was only half-formed and then drifted away like a greased eel, impossible to grasp. I remember his tall figure, the vague outlines of his long black coat, but the details, his eyes, his mouth, his wrinkles, were all obscured by a thick layer of fog. The more I tried to concentrate, the more blurred the images became. I feel like my nerves are stretched like strings about to break. My thoughts repeated a terrible cycle. He knew me, he knew exactly what I was. After, as if he had anticipated my arrival for centuries. Desperately searching for answers, searching for some logic in the nightmare that was engulfing me, I decided to go back to that alley, looking for the antique store again. But when I arrived, the heavy wooden door was locked. The dusty window frame is now empty, no longer revealing any signs of the antiques inside. When I pressed my ear to the rough, time-worn wood, all I heard was oppressive silence. No, not exactly silent. There seemed to be a very soft, muffled creak from the other side of the door. A cold sweat suddenly ran down my spine, and I realized I was shaking so violently that my breathing became labored. I banged on the door, my knuckles aching from the impact, screaming his name, but didn't get any response. Finally, I tiredly retreated to the street, observing the deserted alley with increasing fear in my heart. Could it be that I had dreamed that entire encounter? That feeling is so real. Too real to be a mere nightmare. Night fell again in Lisbon. I remember the streetlight outside my apartment window flickering erratically. Its light dimmed and dimmed, as if it were signaling some impending doom. I tried to focus on the antique compass, scrutinizing the strange engravings around its lid. Shapes resembling staring eyes and swirling waves covered the metal surface. But the more I studied them, the more they seemed to shift, almost vibrate, changing shape just under my gaze. My stomach churned and I struggled to fight the sudden waves of nausea that came over me. And then, the whispers began again, this time forming a new, chaotic chorus of indistinct voices. They describe how the antique collector collected each item, each memory, each lost soul. I heard about the captain of an unnamed ship that went missing in the Devil's Triangle. A learned scholar from Cairo disappeared while researching ancient texts. A reclusive cartographer in Genoa whose maps lead to non-existent lands. A wealthy merchant from the Far East disappeared along with his treasure. Each artifact on my desk seemed to correspond to a person who had disappeared under mysterious, inexplicable circumstances. None of them were confirmed dead, nor were any of them found again. They were simply lost from this world, erased from the flow of time. I tried to piece together their incomprehensible, disjointed stories from the chaotic whispers, but it was like trying to look into a mirror that had been shattered into hundreds of tiny pieces. My concentration constantly wavered, my mind foggy as if a thick layer of spider web was covering my intellect, preventing me from thinking clearly. Then, amidst those fierce whispers, a new voice emerged. A painfully familiar voice. It was my own voice. It begins to recount my life. From my early fascinations with forgotten histories, to the first time I came across a cryptic reference to missing explorers in a dusty old book in the university library. It tells the story of my never-ending hunt for clues, however small, that might unlock the hidden parts of those maritime legends. However, as I listened to my own voice tell my life story, I realized something terrible. It describes events, emotions, important milestones that I can barely remember clearly now. Every time a memory is mentioned, whether happy or sad, it feels distant and vague, like a faint echo from a past that no longer belongs to me. I started to really panic. My heart was pounding madly in my chest. My mouth was so dry that I could hardly swallow my saliva. Am I gradually forgetting my own past? Is the collector slowly stealing my memories, like he did with others? At that moment, paranoia took over me. Even though the apartment was empty, other than old furniture and other damn objects, I kept looking over my shoulder, my heart pounding every time there was a strange noise. My reflection in the mirror looked haggard and tired, with deep dark circles under my eyes that I could barely make out. My heartbeat raced every time a floorboard creaked under my feet, convinced that something was lurking right behind me, waiting for an opportunity. Sleep becomes a luxury, almost impossible. I was startled awake when I heard the slightest sound, the wind whistling through the window. the sound of water dripping in the bathroom. The sound of a car horn in the distance. Every time I woke up, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like it wanted to jump out of my chest. Shadows danced along the walls in the weak light of the street lamps, forming strange shapes that made me doubt my own vision. In my most impatient and panicked moments, I recalled the image of the antique collector. But this time, he doesn't just appear in stores or in nightmares. I began to see him, or his tall, black-coated figure, in moments of memory. Firstly mine, standing behind my neighbor's gate when I was a kid, appeared at the end of the hallway in my childhood home. But that is impossible. That house was on another continent, half a world away from Lisbon. And my earliest memories were certainly not of any strangers in black coats, lurking in the shadows. Yet he was still there, in my mind. In the memories that should have been safe and inviolable. Suddenly, I questioned the authenticity of all my recollections. What if he had quietly inserted himself into my life a long time ago? What if he had been slowly siphoning off bits and pieces of my identity like a silent parasite, just waiting for the right moment to harvest the whole thing? I was determined to confront him again, to end this nightmare before An old friend helped me dig deeper into the history of that mysterious alley and store. The information I received made my blood freeze. That antique shop seems to have been registered under many different names over the centuries, through many different owners on paper, but always offers rare antiques, and in particular, is always associated with explorers, scholars, or wealthy people who have mysteriously disappeared after dealing with the shop. A wave of fear and dizziness almost made me dizzy. My lungs burned as I tried to take deep breaths to calm myself. Why hasn't anyone exposed this before? Or did they try, but then, like me, they were consumed by the oblivion that slowly consumed their minds? Late one afternoon, as the late sunlight died Lisbon's ancient rooftops red, I once again walked through the winding alleys. Wooden door. This time, it was unlocked. It opened invitingly, as if waiting for me. Inside, the light was dimmer than before, but enough to reveal shelves stacked with unbelievable relics. Items that seemed to have existed for hundreds, even thousands of years. Ancient navigational tools, decaying leather-bound diaries, detailed hand-drawn maps of non-existent lands, and countless other strange objects seemed to faintly hum the knowledge stored within them. My palms were sweaty as I walked deeper inside the store. The deep darkness. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I felt his presence before I actually saw him. The collector stood near the back of the crooked wooden table where I had first seen my items. His face was still half hidden by darkness, but this time I felt a cold aura radiating from him. For a moment, a strange, almost imperceptible shimmer of light seemed to surround his form. My entire body felt cold, a violent shiver went through me as if someone had pulled a block of ice down my spine. My mouth was so dry that I couldn't speak properly. I could only let out a hoarse cry, trying to ask who he was. No. He really was. What is it? He tilted his head slightly, as if realizing the secret question screaming in my mind. He did not respond verbally. Instead, he gestured with a slender, pale hand toward a large, bold ledger lying open on the table. The pages of the notebook seemed to emit a faint, weak light. Each page contains the name of a missing person, along with a detailed list of items they left behind, items the collector has collected. My heart stopped completely when I caught a glimpse of my name, scrawled in an ancient but clear handwriting, near the bottom of the notebook. Next to my name was a meticulous list of the artifacts I had recently acquired. The astrolabe, the compass, the stack of parchment, the ivory statue. My knees weakened and I almost collapsed to the dusty floor. My breathing became shallow, gasping, and I could hardly catch a normal rhythm. I realized the horrifying truth in utter horror. I was on my way to becoming just another entry in this living archive, a fountain of knowledge. A collection of memories for him to slowly devour and consume. I don't remember how I ran out of that store, only the feeling of extreme panic pushed me forward with all the strength I had left. The setting sun had painted the streets in a sickly orange light. My ears were ringing from the constant pounding of my heart. My lungs burned from sprinting, cold, damp air rushed into my throat. But adrenaline kept me moving, running without looking back. I don't remember how long I ran, I only know that I finally reached the banks of the Tagus River, crouching on the old stone wall, panting in gulps of the salty afternoon air. In the days that followed, I struggled with an overwhelming desire, a sick urge to go back to that store. The artifacts, even though I had locked them in an old iron chest and hidden, still seemed to call my name, whispering in the night, luring me back. My memory has gradually stabilized a bit after escaping the collector's direct presence, but there are still many large parts of my life, important memories, that remain elusive, as slippery as fish in a net. Sometimes, when I try to remember moments from my childhood, I see the image of a dark coat lurking in the background, and I can't be sure whether it's a real memory or just the product of a slowly cracking mind. There are times when I wonder if I'm just creating a giant hallucination due to exhaustion, stress, and obsession with research. But then my stomach churns every time I think about that possibility. The fear was so vivid, the darkness so persistent, the feeling of being watched so palpable that it was impossible to imagine. My heart rate still skyrockets every time a floorboard creaks behind me in my new apartment. I can't deny that old, hoarse voice still lingers in my ears, calling my name in the terrifying silence of the night. Even though I physically escaped that store, I still feel its ghostly pull whenever I pass by another antique store, or see an old sign offering rare curiosities. It's as if there's an invisible, cold string connecting us. And I know, if I follow that thread far enough, I will find him there again. In the darkness, waiting, with his ledger open, ready to record every last detail of who I am before it completely vanishes. To this day, I still catch my breath every time I accidentally see an old compass in a museum or a bronze astrolabe in a painting. Surely if I looked closer, I would discover more symbols that eerily matched those locked in my fading memory. I have never told anyone this whole story. Even now, writing it down makes my pulse pound and cold sweat run down my spine. The terrifying truth is that I am never completely alone. The collector, or what he represents, is still there. No longer telling of the lost, but now slowly, cruelly explaining the nature of their owners, why the collector craves not only objects, but also the knowledge, experiences, and even souls of those who stumble into his ghostly domain. I felt the edges of my earliest memories becoming more frayed, more fragile, as if the fragile strings that held them together were breaking one by one. For now I remain in Lisbon, uncertain whether leaving will truly free me from the collector's invisible grip. Part of me hoped that by staying close I could keep watch, maybe somehow prevent him from collecting more unsuspecting souls. But another part, the remaining rational part, was afraid that every day that passed here would tighten the bond between me and him, and that ledger. Sometimes, in the pale, feeble light of dawn, I try to remember something specific from my childhood, the face of a close friend, the smell of my grandmother's kitchen, the feel of a happy summer day. And then I feel a shadow slowly covering that memory, stealing important details, fading the emotions, before I can fully grasp them. It was an oppression I constantly lived with, a slow spiritual erosion that made every introspective moment a potential trap, a door to total oblivion. I had no illusions that I had defeated him by running away. He is ancient, cunning, and extremely patient. He lives on the memories of those who have strayed too close to the secrets he protects. I wonder how much longer my mind can withstand this invasion. How many more nights can I endure the weak but persistent whispers that penetrate through the walls, creep under the doors, telling me about the ruined lives and unfinished stories of which I am gradually becoming a part? To anyone listening to this story late at night, I can offer no easy consolation or clear solution. My heart still beats abnormally fast, my fingers still tremble as I type these last words, and my throat still tightens with fear every time I recall that last glimpse of that deadly ledger and my name written therein. A nagging question still haunts me, creeping into even the fragmentary dreams that remain. Am I just a footnote waiting to be completed, a collection of memories waiting to be harvested? Or do I still have some chance of escaping this antiquities collector's spectral grasp? Every night, as darkness enveloped the ancient city of Lisbon, I stared at the flickering shadows on my wall and wondered if tomorrow would be the day my last memory would slip away forever, leaving me with nothing but a lingering sense of loss. Soul, forever. And perhaps even telling this story was part of his plan. A way for my memory to be recorded one last time before it completely disappeared into the collector's vast collection. Be careful what you look for in the dark, because sometimes the dark is looking for you too.